So our first question is, if flexible working, particularly home working, is here to stay, what does that mean from a HR perspective? Janet, we'd love for you to say hello and for us to hear your thoughts.
I think it's important for us all to remember that the right to flexible working has always been enshrined in law, and we in HR are well used to making sure that that is fairly managed and administered throughout our organisations. So that's the first thing. But I think absolutely the pandemic has highlighted the need for being creative and thinking through what flexible working really means when actually what you're doing is you're doing it to keep people safe. In the hospices context, of course, we have patients and wraparound services for our patients, and indeed community services. So for us, there was quite a large number of the population within the hospice that couldn't work from home. So for us, it was about keeping a fair tension and keeping holding that there were people on the front line potentially putting their lives at risk every day, plus those of us who were sort of in the offices and nice and safe. So it's been quite a difficult line to walk and hold that tension so that everybody feels that they've been treated fairly. But I think there are things to consider. There's all the practical things around, you know, data going off site. Is it secure? Is the equipment that people are using appropriate? What are the additional costs that people are incurring? You know, insurance costs for working from home, utility bills, all of those sorts of things. And how do you offset that against the saving of not having to travel into work? But I think for me, more interestingly and more challenging is psychological welfare. We know that people who have been shielded and furloughed feel that isolation very strongly, but so do colleagues who are working from home. So it's about what are we doing to support the psychological welfare of all those constituent groups, as well as the psychological welfare of those who continue to come to work. That's really important. And I think it's about cutting your coat according to your cloth and responding to the different needs of those constituencies and understanding that those needs are different. That's really, really important. And then I think there are some usual HR issues that crop up as well around performance management. It's much harder at a distance when you can't see what somebody's actually doing and when they're doing it. And making sure that those decisions that you're making are fair and transparent and are indeed appropriate to the situation. And those are just a few opening thoughts, but I'm sure the other panelists have got lots to add to that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Janet. And Anna, I would love to hear, you know, more from you and your thoughts.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. So at the Society, we are taking a bit of a different approach. We were quite conscious that it could result in a unique contract for each employee if we just went by the flexible working request. So we are implementing an agile working policy, so allowing people to work in a way that best suits them, a way in which they feel more productive, but also meets business requirements and needs. So we are currently consulting with employees to make sure we can implement something that works well. We're currently all working remotely, and that has worked rather well. Obviously, there are the different challenges of, you know, silo working between teams, not having that opportunity to collaborate. So really being conscious about what we've learned during the lockdown and taking that forward when we move back into some form of normality, how we can continue to encourage those that are working remotely to still be actively part of the team, but that people can access the office when they need to. But it's definitely something that I think is going to be around. It's really COVID. One of the good things about COVID is it has shown that people can work remotely and still be productive. And yeah, there obviously are different challenges there, but yeah, it's definitely something that supports well-being. I think for a lot of our employees, the fact that they don't have to get on a busy tube in the morning and potentially start off the day on the wrong foot, it's really helped. So I think there are the different angles of it, but yeah, we're trying to make sure we can implement some blanket policies that will further support employees without having to make individual contractual changes, because that could require quite a lot of time and effort.
Exactly, I completely agree, and so interestingly, two completely different sort of perspectives on that. And Lornette, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I think in terms of the question, is home working here to stay? I think it will be here to stay in some form, although I think over the medium term, more people will want to go back into the workplace and to work with colleagues, but probably in a blended approach where some people are working at home on a part-time basis as opposed to full-time working at home at the moment. We've tried to anticipate that in terms of giving people the opportunity to set out how they would like to work going forward, and whether they'd like to work at home on a full-time or part-time basis. I think one of the things that we've seen as well is the level of flexibility we've been able to provide to people working at home, but also the level of flexibility that you get back. You know, people have had to juggle a range of different things, you know, caring responsibilities, homeschooling, etc. So people haven't always been able to work conventional hours, and we've tried to, as far as we can, allow people to flex their hours to meet those individual circumstances with a clear focus on outcomes and what needs to be delivered by when. So I think what is going to be interesting is how that adapts to back in the workplace in the medium to longer term, and whether managers and organisations are going to continue to be as flexible with people's working hours as well as with the location that they're working from. But I certainly agree with Janet that the issues around you know, health and well-being and supporting managers in that process are really quite important, and you know, giving managers the confidence, helping them to have the confidence to recognise that because you can't see someone, it doesn't mean that they're not working.
I completely agree. And then finally on to Louise for your thoughts.
Good morning, everybody. So it's a really good question, and I think for HR, it's going to require us to think quite naturally about this. I think there's a myriad of issues, and I'd echo everything that Janet, Lornette, and Anna have already said this morning. But I think for us as an organisation, it's brought in a really interesting dynamic around trust. And I think going forward, we're going to be returning into the office in September. I think it's part of the reason for that is actually we're rationalising our office space. So we'll be returning on a 60-40 model. So staff will be required to work a minimum of 60% of their working hours in the office and then 40% from home. If that's successful, we would then probably reverse that and go to 40-60. But I think part of this is actually remembering that even in the last 10 months, it's brought in an interesting perspective around trusting staff to actually do their job. And I think prior to the lockdown, there were some issues in the organisation that if you were working from home, you were not working. And I think this has actually really flipped that on its head. And I think I can say in all honesty that staff at the college have probably never worked harder than they have in the last 10 months, because they've had to really be very creative and very innovative. We're a membership organisation. We train all paediatricians across the UK and in an increasing number of countries internationally as well. So we're having to provide exams, we're having to provide online courses, we're having to do all our big flagship conferences virtually. So we've had to think very, very creatively about how we do that. The other consideration is our members have actually been going into hospitals day in, day out to provide services. A number of those paediatricians have been transferred into adult services during this period as well. So again, it's actually just some of that culture about explaining to our staff across the organisation that a number of our members may not have done any adult care since medical school, and then actually they were going on to wards to provide care for patients who had COVID. So for our members, it's been an increasingly stressful time, but I think it's also fair to say that it's been a very challenging time for staff as well. And I think we're seeing an increasing level of staff who are talking about burnout, anxiety, stress, and the fact that, you know, working from home and actually being in the home environment 24/7 has been a blurring between working and actually having downtime as well. So I think those challenges will continue for the foreseeable future. But I think that does really take us back to our organisational purpose as well. And I think for every organisation that is now thinking about going back into work, now is the time to really talk about the organisational purpose again, and your people strategy really needs to be aligned with that organisational purpose, but it also needs to be aligned with your estate's strategy. And there will be lots of organisations that will not be going back into the office 5 days a week, so people will actually be seeking probably to, like very much as we as a college, about renting out some of our office space. So we will be going to hot desking, we'll be going to collaboration spaces, so even the workplace culture is going to change hugely in terms it's going to become one of community and collaboration rather than just a workplace. So I think it's a really interesting time for us as HR, and it gives us an opportunity to get involved in so many other things across the whole organisation that historically we may not have had the opportunity to contribute to.
Fantastic, and thank you so much for that, Louise. It's really interesting to hear, you know, sort of such a variety of thoughts, you know, sort of all based on one thing, you know, flexible working, but perhaps hearing about, you know, each individual organisational's journeys and how we are now shifting that to a more sort of positive stance, you know, for 2021, but, you know, moving forward.